So I'm about to unload a lot of big resume words, but Michael is the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist behind many people, of course, know you now through Spotlight, which won the Oscars, won the Best Picture Oscar. You were you okay being played by the actor who played you?
I was more than okay with being played by Mark Ruffalo. I can't imagine anyone who would have done a better job or who would have been more appropriate.
That's awesome. Yeah, he did a great job, and he's definitely popular with the ladies and everyone else. So not bad. That's sort of like if someone called up and said George Clooney wanted to do my biopic. Maybe it's a little old for the job, but you get the idea. So Michael, what's that?
You never can tell. Maybe it'll happen.
So for, I guess, my first question, and I'm going to try to ask questions you haven't been asked 5,000 times before, but I apologize in advance if they're similar. But how did, journalists are behind the scenes generally. You can have a strong voice and presence, and your mind and your heart can lead the direction of your investigations. But suddenly seeing yourself go into this process of being played by a Hollywood star in a major movie, did that feel violating, or was it fun, or both?
Well, ultimately, it was very satisfying and enjoyable. At first, it felt very odd. As you say, normally, those of us in journalism keep ourselves out of the story. For instance, we wrote a book, a very good book, I have to say, about our investigation of clergy sexual abuse. It was written by 8 members of the Globe Spotlight team, and we're not in it. So we just wrote about our investigation. So the movie Spotlight is not based on the book that we wrote. The movie Spotlight is based on the interviews and the research that the co-writers did themselves. So we've always kept ourselves out. So it felt very strange to have someone come along and say, hey, we want to make a movie about the work you did.
Yeah, it's almost like violation is almost too strong a word, but a violation of basic journalism, kind of your attitude, your MO, your modus operandi. But in a way, you have to allow yourself to be kind of dramatized so that people can begin to care about the issues that you are, of course, very passionate about, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And that's why we felt okay about it from the very beginning, because what happened is 2 producers approached us, Bly Faust and Nicole Rockland, and their pitch to us was they wanted to make a movie about the importance of journalism at a time when real journalism is in peril. And we thought that was a pretty good argument and said, sure, go ahead and let's see what you can do.
Yeah, so every summer I host all of our staff who are all over the world, and they fly into Boulder, and we have a week together, and we have a movie night. And one of the movies we watch every year is All the President's Men, which is kind of Spotlight 1.0. And I think this was the first year where I felt like very few of the younger staff had not seen it, but hadn't heard of it. And I think from that point of view, it's very powerful to have a refresh, to have a 2.0 on the role of journalism in society, what we journalists like to call fourth estate, in which no one else really knows what that term is. So just a reminder for everyone obsessed either for or against our very always fascinating president, what is the role of journalism in society?
Well, the role of journalism in society is to hold powerful people, powerful institutions accountable for what they do and what they say. So people living in a democracy can have the information they need to make decisions about their elected officials, about their corporate leaders, about the leaders of nonprofit organizations. I believe that democracy simply cannot function without solid, fact-based journalism.
And I know this is a complicated question, but it's pretty easy for you. But and I don't mean that in a flattering way, but it's something journalists obsess about. So much of media now is thought to be liberal or to be conservative, to be partisan in one way or the other. Is that journalism?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's the responsibility of a journalist to be nonpartisan. I've written very critical stories about Democrats as well as Republicans. I think it's our duty to hold people accountable, whatever their party, whatever their philosophy, and let the chips fall where they may.
Exactly. So I think a lot of times, journalists are always kind of a lose proposition. So when you're criticizing President Obama, you're not doing so enough to make conservatives happy, probably, and liberals probably feel irritated. And then when you're criticizing President Trump, it's seen as partisan hackery and like you have it out for him. So in a way, you're doing it right when you're getting criticism from both sides.
I think that's true. Journalism is not supposed to be a popularity contest. And I think there probably are a few journalists who view it that way. But honestly, we're here to tell the truth. And if that means we get criticized by the people we're writing about, then so be it. That's just part of the job. If we offend the sensibilities of readers, listeners, and viewers, well, that's often part of the job as well. Our job is to tell the truth, to give people in a democracy the facts that they need to function in a civil society.
So what was the movie, for the few people who haven't seen it, who maybe want to see it? I think it's on Netflix right now. It's very accessible.
It is.
What was the story that you and your colleagues invested so much time and money in pursuing?
Well, we investigated clergy sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. When we started our investigation in 2002, there had been several scandals around the country before we came along, but still, people thought each one of these scandals represented a very, 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 very rare situation. And most people could not believe, we could not believe, those of us on the Globe Spotlight team, how widespread the problem of clergy sexual abuse was, and how deep and how high the cover-up went. Because, of course, the significance of what we did is not so much that we wrote about widespread clergy sexual abuse, although that was very important. I think the most significant thing that we did was we revealed the cover-up. We revealed that top church officials knew that serial sexual abusers in the priesthood were molesting children decade after decade after decade, and allowing them to continue doing so by transferring them from parish to parish to parish every time they got caught.
So I was mentioning to you when we were in the green room, but we here at Elephant, we have this Elephant Academy. We train sort of the next generation of any age in something you could call modern journalism, how to get a story out. I always say the world's most important question is how to get people to pay attention to important things.
Right.
And it's really difficult. I can almost guarantee, ironically, that if Elephant Journal, we have 5 million Facebook fans. That's a vast amount. That's like 3 times MSNBC on Facebook or what have you. But those numbers are almost meaningless, because if we shared a story saying not only rampant sexual abuse in the clergy, but a cover up for decades, our readers wouldn't click it. And this is Facebook I'm talking about. And if we then shared a story that said, this secret ingredient in your smoothie will change your morning, we'll have tons of readers. So this is the role of journalism, what you do. And I respect so much what you and all of our colleagues and your colleagues everywhere do, is you get important stories out there in a way that people, the readers, connect with. How did you work to, was the public interested in this story, I guess?
Yes, the public was very, very, very interested. I think in part because Boston is the most Catholic city, most Catholic big city in America. But you raise a very interesting issue. I can produce a lot of investigative reporting, and it might be very, very dry, and it will turn a lot of people off, or people won't read it. And so I try very hard to make my investigations really about people. And I do the hard research, I do the hard investigation into the facts, but I also try to show how the subject of my investigation relates to everyday. I think that's what brings readers, viewers, and listeners in, is they understand that what I'm writing about is not something abstract, although I could write about it in an abstract way, but they're reading on it and reading all the way through the story, I hope, because I'm writing about real people who are confronting the situations that I've researched.
And sometimes that used to be called, when I was in journalism school, I was mentioning it to you at Boston University, I think we call that new journalism. Now I think new journalism means something else, but like Truman Capote and others using the tools of fiction and applying it to nonfiction.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I often write stories that are 5,000 words or longer, and I want people to read all the way to the end. And in order to get them to read all the way to the end, I do employ novelistic techniques. I never say anything that is not factually accurate. However, I'll have a lead about an interesting person. I might end a section with a cliffhanger. I'll build to a climax. These are all literary techniques that we can use in fact-based journalism. And once you start writing a story that says more than 600 or 700 words, I think you really have to employ some creative writing techniques to get people all the way through the story.
Yeah, it's funny in this day and age, so many people, like I did a video series last year on YouTube that was pretty successful. And so many people said, your videos need to be 3 minutes or 4 minutes or shorter.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, I don't think so. I think they need to be as long or as short as they should be for the subject. And I kept using comedians in cars getting coffee as a example, which is a funny defense for a journalist, but Seinfeld, with his classic, sort of arrogance and success, kind of charming arrogance, said, I don't want to do 3-minute videos. I don't care if everyone tells me I have to. I'm going to do 22-minute videos. And if it fails, it fails. Who cares? I'm a billionaire, And he did it. And it turns out that in this speedy day and age where we're all on our phones and Instagram and we're all busy and stressed out and busy, almost being busy, that there's a longing for long form quality writing and longer videos. Do you find that to be true?
Yes, I do find it to be true. And, it is counterintuitive, but it is absolutely true. And I know it's true because we now have the technology that shows us it's true. For instance, we have the technology at the Globe where at any moment, and I'm sure most other big newspapers have this as well, but at any moment I can go onto this website and I can see precisely how many people are on bostonglobe.com. I can see how many people are reading which stories, and I can see what is the average amount of time a person is spending on a particular story. When this technology was introduced, I got to tell you, I was nervous.
Yeah.
Because I thought, oh man, who's really reading all the way to the end of a 5,000 word spotlight story? The editors and publisher of the Globe are going to discover that no one's reading what we do. This could be awful. And to my great surprise, we found that the opposite is true. We found that readers love the Spotlight team. Readers love long-form journalism, not just the investigative pieces we produce, but the long-form narrative pieces, just great stories. So that has been a very rewarding discovery about the attention span of people in this very, very busy age.
And I think thank you. I think what I was pointing to with the smoothie analogy or example is when quality writing or journalism or an important subject like climate change is a classic example that people love to not pay attention to because it's a bummer. When we share that through Facebook, the structure of their algorithm is such that it often doesn't do well and it gets ignored. But if you're strong enough, like the Globe or the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or what have you, it's actually the opposite can be true, that human beings want to engage in more than a sort of click, 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 click kind of mentality. We want to sit down. Like, I'm never happier than when I open a new New Yorker and I see a 14-page article on some damn thing,
Yeah, the New Yorker does a great job of presenting very, very long stories that are just endlessly intriguing, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. They do a wonderful job. But people are interested in quality long form journalism. Another of the points that I like to focus on when we think about how to keep readers is talk about some of the solutions to the problem we're writing about. We did an investigation at the Spotlight team of the woeful, shameful mental health care system in Massachusetts. And the last installment of the series was, here's how you can fix it. And specifically, we went to San Antonio, Texas, that does a pretty good job with their mental health care system. And we said, look, here's a governmental region, a county that is doing a much better job than anyone else in dealing with people who are living there who are mentally ill. So we were telling people, here are the terrible things happening in Massachusetts, and guess what? It's fixable. Here's how some other people have done it. And I think that made a big difference, that people could see that we were also making effort to provide solutions and not just being grim, story after story after story.
Yeah, well said. Now, our challenge is, so we also invested heavily in Instagram staff time. We blew up, and it's actually been really delightful. We've found Instagram to be one area where we can share quality content and messages, and people care about it and like it and share it and comment but of course there's no way to click on Instagram. If you're familiar, there's no way to click particularly and go to the article. So again, it's a sort of form of social media that is good for presence, but not necessarily for actually clicking over to, say, the Boston Globe. So my question is, in 2017, let alone the next 10 years, 20 years, how can we as readers who, whether we're conservative or liberal, up and down, whatever, how can we support journalism and keep quality information that isn't partisan in our lives? What can we do to support your work and others?
Sure. It's pretty simple. One is to identify credible sources of news and to subscribe. I mean, it's really that simple. If you want to support quality journalism, you have to subscribe to your local news organization or your national news organization or your global news organization of choice. And I would suggest that it be a news organization that is really fact-based and is not catering to a particular ideological point of view. I think, one of the dangers, I mean, I love social media, and frankly, most of the people who read my series on the Children of Catholic Priests came to the Globe website through social media. So I think it's a fantastic tool. I think one of the reasons the initial Globe Spotlight investigation into clergy sexual abuse went worldwide is because we published just at the dawn of the internet era. I think it might have been the first investigation of its kind to go viral. So, I really love social media in many ways, but I think the danger of social media, and you had an article on your website recently about Facebook that I thought was quite good and quite insightful on this. The danger of social media is people tend to structure their pages in a way that they only hear from people who are like them. In other words, someone gets on Twitter and they start following people that are like them, and news organizations that cater to their ideological or philosophical beliefs are no longer getting a wide range of opinion. And they may not be getting fact-based journalism. It may be more comfortable to subscribe only to so-called news organizations that cater to people of a certain political party or a certain ideological point of view. So I think what people can do is a couple of things. One is to, as I say, you got to support quality journalism with your money, and it's not a lot of money when you think about how much it is to buy a latte every day. I mean, you can pretty much subscribe to any quality news organization you would like for the same amount of money, maybe less.
Farley, I just got an Americano before this, and it was $4.50 with tip.
Exactly. Yeah.
A generous tip. That's like enough to get most publications for almost an entire month.
Well, exactly. And then the other thing I would suggest is don't just restrict yourself to a small number of news organizations. I mean, I follow a lot of different organizations. I mean, I follow, of course, the New York Times and the Washington Post, but I look at Breitbart every day as well, and the Wall Street Journal. And because I want to know what everybody is thinking, what everybody is saying, I want to get a wide spectrum of points of view. And I think those are just two basic things that people can do: support quality journalism financially, and don't restrict yourself to an organization that's just going to make you feel comfortable.
What do you say to, it's one of the sort of ongoing frustrations or heartbreaks I have as and again, what Elephant does is typically not journalism, but we have journalism ethics behind what we do. When New York Times or Washington Post or whomever get kind of pigeonholed as liberal, I generally respond and say, well, they're actually just doing journalism. is pretty fact-based, it's pretty fantastic. The editorial, the op-ed pages may have a particular bias depending on the article, and overall may be liberal. Wall Street Journal a couple years ago was conservative overall, but the journalism was fantastic. How do you kind of handle that? Because right now I think some people are really succeeding in undermining journalism itself by saying it's all fake news, right?
Yeah, I do worry about that. You know, we seem to be entering an era where people think they're entitled to their own facts. Years ago, but not too many years ago, there was a U.S. Senator from New York, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and he was in debate on the Senate floor, and he said to his opponent, "You're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts." And I think, unfortunately, we have entered an era where people seem to think they are entitled to their own facts. What's most troubling to me about the era we're in is that people can't agree on what reality is. I think if we can all agree on what the facts are, then we can have a discussion about how to solve our collective problems. But if we don't agree on what the fundamental facts are, then we just really have a way to go before we can communicate in a meaningful way. So I am troubled by this notion that people think they are entitled to their own version of reality, when in fact there's only one reality. So I think people need to subscribe to news organizations that are as objective and fact-based as possible. But I must say, no news organization is infallible, and to rely only on one is a mistake. I think, as I said, I either read or look at 3 or 4 or 5 every morning. Now, maybe that's a little bit overly conscientious, but I do think that it's not wise to rely on a single source of news.
When you're looking at some site like Breitbart or its liberal equivalent, do you consider any of what they do? And again, whatever the liberal equivalent is, maybe Think Progress or something, do you view any of what they do as journalism? Are they doing some good work in there? Or is it just one point of view that is helpful?
Well, I think the point of view is helpful. It's interesting to me when Breitbart disagrees with Donald Trump. It's interesting to me when the Wall Street editorial page ardently disagrees with what's happening in the Trump administration. So I think it's instructive to follow all this sort of thing. And I do think, I think publications like the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Wall Street Journal provide very, very high quality fact-based journalism. No question about it. And I think lots of news organizations around the country also do their very, very best to provide fact-based journalism.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. So I think, that's something we encourage in the Academy a lot, is subscribe to at least a couple publications.
Yeah, of course.
And then read and actually be active, like read and share that stuff up, stuff that you find helpful. And, I make a point when once in a while, I am moderate liberal personally. When Trump does something I support or approve of, which does happen on occasion,
sure,
I make a point to share that up. And, it's very interesting to me that the New York Times once in a while, which is the main thing I read, will write, positive reports on something he has done or thoughtful. They don't come at it in a partisan way.
Right.
So what's your involvement? I know you're coming here to Boulder pretty soon. What are you coming here for?
Well, I'm going to talk about journalism. I'm going to have a session with the editor of The Hindu, a very well-established, very prestigious newspaper in India. And I think we're going to have a conversation, I think, very much like the one you and I are having right now. Yeah. And I'm also going to be in a session with Suki Kim, who's a really interesting investigative reporter who went undercover in North Korea. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she went undercover in North Korea. She was posing as a evangelical teacher in the most prestigious university in Pyongyang. And really what she was doing is gathering information for a book, an expose on what she discovered in North Korea. So it was a really, she produced a very, very high quality piece of investigative journalism at pretty significant risk. So we're going to talk about journalism. We're going to talk about what it's like to investigate an institution that seems impenetrable. In her case, the cult-like country government of North Korea, and in my case, the Catholic Church, which, by the way, in the United States, everybody knows the First Amendment provides for freedom of expression and a free press. It also provides for freedom of religion. So religious organizations enjoy a lot of protection in the United States, and it makes it difficult to investigate them as we did. So Suki and I are going to talk about what's it like to investigate very, very secretive institutions. And we're also going to talk about writing, because after all, Suki, her journalism took the form of a book, and my journalism takes the form of long form writing on our website or in the newspaper. So we're going to talk, I think, both about investigations and about narrative journalism.
From a sort of, maybe you mentioned religion, from a religious or spiritual or just human point of view, where do folks like you and Suki and other journalists actually doing work that can feel from intimidating, taking on the Catholic Church, to feeling physically in some sort of danger, like reporting in a war? I was just reading about Ken Burns's upcoming Vietnam documentary series. You know, that was, as they said, the first and last war in which journalists were able to report in a kind of completely unsupervised manner.
That's right.
With a lot of freedom. So where do you folk get your groundedness or bravery? Is it about service to the public? Or, I mean, you must have felt pretty, I mean, I know Boston, taking on the Catholic Church must have felt pretty scary.
Well, for me, it really, I guess it is a calling, really. I mean, I got into journalism a long time ago at a small, rabble-rousing neighborhood newspaper in a low-income neighborhood in Boston, East Boston. You know, we were fighting airport expansion, the expansion of Logan Airport into the neighborhood. We were taking on arsonists. We were taking on folks who were dumping trash illegally in vacant lots next to people's homes. So we were using journalism to make our neighborhood a better place. And I view my job today still fundamentally as an effort to make the world a better place and contribute to society. So, you know, that's where I get my groundedness. I guess it's a sense of mission that I have about journalism. You know, when the Spotlight team won the Pulitzer Prize for our investigation into the Catholic Church, there was a little fairly modest ceremony in the newsroom. And our book critic, Gail Caldwell, who had known me for a very long time, she came up to me to congratulate me, and she said, you know, you've come a long way since the East Boston Community News. And I thought about it, and I said, you know, I haven't. I'm still doing the same thing. The only difference is I get a decent paycheck every week, and there's some lawyers around who will defend me if I ever get sued for libel or if I want to go to court to try to get documents. So for me, it's been almost a career-long calling.
Yeah, you need to field a team, like a baseball team of journalists called the Rabble Rousers.
That would be a good team, yes.
Yeah. So I guess just to sort of repeat that question, because I think it's easy for the public to kind of miss, you know, journalists by their nature are, you know, we don't have Oscar awards, right? The Pulitzers result in a little, you know, you buy donuts and make fresh coffee and have a little in-office ceremony.
Yeah, you're right about that. I remember when after we won the Pulitzer Prize, I had a friend of mine call me, and she said, "So you're still answering your phone?" And I said, well, yeah, that's how I get stories. You know, I answer my phone. People talk to me. He says, "Well, what's going to happen now? Do you get your own office? Do you get a secretary? Are you going to get a secretary?" And I said, "The only thing I get is a chance to do it again."
We're pretty sensitive these days. You guys, Suki, I mean, what Suki did going undercover, you guys are endangering life and limb, or at least reputation, regularly. How do you handle, again, just how do you handle that kind of emotional baggage or weight?
Well, I have to say, those of us who are in journalism in America have a great luxury, because very rarely very rarely, if ever, are we in any real physical danger. Very, very rarely is someone going to retaliate or respond to a story by threatening physical violence or harming a journalist. It just doesn't happen very often. But in most parts of the world, journalists take incredible risks. And, just not too far from just across the border in Mexico, I think more journalists have been killed over the last 10 years, murdered in Mexico than any other country in the world. In places like Turkey right now, there are more journalists in prison in Turkey than anywhere in the world. There are more than 80 journalists right now who have been sent to prison on basically trumped up charges for indeterminate amounts of time. It's quite frightening. I think Suki Kim in North Korea was taking an incredible risk. If she were discovered and imprisoned in North Korea, she'd be in very, very trying circumstances without any question. So I think
if not far more, right?
Exactly. So, I do want to give a lot of credit to my colleagues who work in the media overseas, because they really make tremendous sacrifices, take great risks, more than those of us who have the good fortune to be practicing our craft in the United States.
Yeah, well, thank you to you and all of your colleagues. I didn't pose the question very well, but there is this sense in my daily life that the most mild, like I'm pretty active in local politics here in Boulder.
I see, yeah.
The most mild disagreement about policy, where we're going, we're trying to municipalize here, municipalize our energy, which has been on the front page of the New York Times and stuff. It's a big effort here. When I disagree with friends of mine in Boulder, that becomes this rancorous, intense thing on Facebook, and it's so mild, the kind of disagreement or that we ordinary citizens go through versus a journalist who it's almost your job to bring up inconvenient truths. Not in the sense of the movie, but facts that one side or the other is going to be dismayed about.
It's true. Especially if you're doing investigative reporting, you're probably going to make someone unhappy. In fact, if you're not making someone unhappy, you're probably not doing the job correctly.
Right. Exactly. There's a famous quote that's a bit extreme, but it's, I forget who it is. You probably know it. Orwell or someone who says, journalism makes people unhappy. Everything else is PR, something like that.
Yeah. So the quote is almost exactly that journalism is publishing what someone else does not want to see published. Everything else is public relations, and it is attributed to Orwell. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely right. I remember it's absolutely right. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and I think my only criticism in terms of how journalism could evolve right now is if we could put, like, Spotlight did a wonderful service for journalism. It reminded the public why journalism matters, and it dramatized it in a way that was relatable, like your long story, your long form writing. We all got emotionally invested in that story, and those scenes where the journalists are running around their city, coming up against closed door after closed door, or running
right.
Neighborhood House. Remember, it's such a powerful scene.
Yeah.
When I was living in Boston, one of my favorite quotes was on the side of the Boston Public Library, and I can't remember it because it's been too many years, but it was Thomas Jefferson, I'm pretty sure, and it said something about information or learning or knowledge. It was connected to the library, not journalism particularly, but it said something like, an informed citizenry is fundamental to democracy. Something.
Yeah. Yes. James Madison said very, very similar things while writing the First Amendment. The First Amendment to the Constitution exists because the founding fathers realized that without credible information, people could not function in a democracy. This is something the founding fathers realized. That's why we have a First Amendment.
Yeah. So what I was going to say is my only criticism would be it's almost like we need an annual Oscars ceremony for journalism. We need to make it. We need to pull you all out of the shadows of humbleness and actually honor it. Because imagine if kids grew up, like here in Boulder, there's tons of famous rock climbers or cyclists or runners, and kids grow up idolizing these people because they're in the Olympics or they're in the whatever. What if kids grew up saying, I want to be someone who ensures democracy lasts another 10 years? I want to be a journalist when I grow up. And I grew up kind of wanting to be a journalist. I love baseball, so I grew up wanting to be a baseball writer.
Sure.
Like Roger, I don't know I've never known how to say his last name, but Angel.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think the Spotlight movie did provide a service in this way. I mean, I think it really has inspired a new generation of young people to become reporters and to become good investigative reporters. So that's another reason I love the movie, is it has inspired a lot of young people to do exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Michael, you've been very generous with your time and also waiting for us to get these technical difficulties. For those who are in Boulder or are able to be in Boulder, we put info in the comments on Facebook, and we'll do the same on YouTube about finding Michael at the Jaipur Literary Festival. And we can subscribe, obviously, to the Globe if you'd like to see Michael's work. And you can go, there's probably a way to not subscribe paying, but to follow your stories, right?
Yeah, I think so. But if you go to bostonglobe.com, you'll be able to subscribe without no question about it.
But if you go to your bio or something, there's probably a way to just get alerts just for Michael's stories as well. And like Michael said, subscribe to a couple different publications: Economist, New Yorker, whatever, Boston Globe, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, left or right. Hopefully it's kind of neither. Hopefully it's fact-based. And it may have editorial opinions, but the journalism is solid.
Exactly. That's what we're looking for, is credible, fact-based journalism.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share this video with our Elephant Academy. I know all of our, we call them apprentices. They're learning how to use social media to communicate truth, whether it's in the form of journalism or other creative writing. And, you know, hopefully you'll be like George Clooney to them. Or Mark Ruffalo, I should say.
Mark Ruffalo, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Michael, thank you so much, man.
All right, take care.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right.